for forgetting to turn on the recorder and get all the way through class and it's not recorded. I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot. There is a little tiny red light in the upper left that comes on, but it's not real obvious. So if I don't say something in class at the beginning, if I start getting into lecture and I haven't said something like, I'm turning the recording on now, or the recording's on, or something like that, please holler at me and let me know to say, hey, the recording. I haven't actually done that in a while since I asked students to help me, but I'm usually pretty good about remembering that. But you should hear me say something about turning on the recording. And so this recording will be posted later online for you to review or to view for the first time. It's got to be processed, and I got to upload it to YouTube. So by the end of the day, for sure. I know that seems a little bit long. It's kind of one of those things when I can get a chance to upload it to YouTube and then make the link in Blackboard, but definitely by the end of the day. So Ryan, do you have any questions for me before we actually get anything about the class? If you want to talk to me in Blackboard, that's fine. By all means, you can turn your microphone on. The only thing I do ask is if you leave it muted, if you're not going to talk because of background noise stuff, wherever you are, if you're at home. Like, for example, every once in a while you might hear, I have 3 dogs at home, so they go crazy if someone comes to the door. So, you might have that going on. So if you want to speak, by all means, unmute your mic and ask me a question. You can also type it in the little chat thing. I'm pretty good about following along with lecture and also keeping an eye on the chat box. So if you type in a question, I may be looking for a good place to kind of pause or stop to answer that. But so, I did see it. I haven't missed it. So just hold on if I haven't gotten to it right away. I talked about in class a little bit about this idea. You need to go out. About this idea that online has some challenges about communicating with me. For example, it's very virtual. You can see me, and also you can turn on your camera if you like. That's another thing that I ask. If you don't need to have it on, then don't turn it on because it lags the system. It's one of those things where the feature's there, but unfortunately, I don't know, maybe my end of the internet or wherever it is, but you can certainly turn it on if you wanted to show me something or you needed to, if you wanted to turn it on, you could certainly do that. I have no issue with that as well. You could draw on the screen if you have the touch screen. Turn my pencil on, there we go. So you could say, no, I'm talking about that right there. Or I can say, can someone circle to me to one of the 2p orbitals? And Ryan would say, sure, I could do that right there. Of course, I ask that you not write anything on there that I'm going to get in trouble for, and I don't think anybody would do that anyway. So, what else do we need to do? Online, collaborate, talk to me, chat with me, write on the board. Unmute your mic, especially with this class. I mean, it looks like it might be you and I this semester, Ryan, online. By all means, don't think that because we're online, there's any stipulation about not interacting with me. It's actually, like I said, something we need to work at harder. Okay, let me let Cooper out of the room. All right, go. All right. Alrighty, so I'm ready to begin with lecture. If you have any questions with me about Blackboard, where to find stuff, assignments, due dates, any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, ready? Excellent. And you said I'm loud and clear, so I was just going to ask about that. So perfect, that's fine. Sometimes during class, if I ask something like, a question, you can say yes, you can type it in, you could speak, or again, you could use those little, I think there's a thumbs up emoticon or whatever you call those things. So, all right, now I got to figure out exactly where we were. I'm running two sections of this class, and you're close, but I want to make sure I don't skip anything. So I'm going to go through, and I think, I'm looking at the right one over here, actually. By that, that's, you know what, I'm going to remove that slide because unfortunately the other day when I was showing you this thing about the atomic mass, I wrote this very different, and they wrote the atomic number in the upper left, and I believe it was standardized. I can't remember if for sure my chemistry days, but there we go. But if I'm pretty certain that you put the atomic number down in the lower left. Come on, pen. Mass up here. So if that's confusing to you, the positioning. If that's confusing to you, then kind of ignore that slide. I just noticed that the other day when I flashed it on the screen. I'm like, that's kind of opposite of what I told you guys. So, right, that's not confusing to you, right? Though you understand atomic mass, atomic number. No question on that. Cool. All right, let's see. So, we talked about radioisotopes. We estimated how long the pygmy mammoth had been, or how many half-lives the pygmy mammoth had been dead. Stop me if I get to a slide and I make a little blurb like that, and you're like, no, we didn't do that, because I think about right in here is where we stopped. No, we were a little further. Bonds, wasn't it? Yes, that's where we were, right? We hadn't talked about bonds yet. I think I had just begun to all right, good deal. Okay, so we've been talking about the structure of atoms, you know, and we really did, again, don't get too worried about the in-depth details about that orbital and that shell thing. I think for me, the most important thing that I would like you to know about that is just some simple chemistry ideas that for example, electrons are in orbitals, those weird, well, not always, just sometimes they're round, dumbbell-shaped things, those clouds of probability, that's where they really are. And then collections of those are called shells. So when we say electrons are in shells, the unfortunate thing is we kind of get a mental picture of what you see on this page, which is the Bohr representation. Remember I said that physicist Niels Bohr, was it Niels, Niels? I don't know, Bohr. Anyway, he came up with this way to help students understand atomic structure. And at the time, he actually kind of thought this is the way it works, sort of like the planets and all that stuff going around the sun, right? But it's, of course, not really that way. And on the right, the picture on the right kind of is a little more that way. It's these clouds of things. You know, it's very strange things about electrons. I was reading online that electrons have no angular momentum. Have you taken physics in college or high school, Ryan? You're a senior. Would you have taken physics yet? Yeah, isn't that senior year you do that or something, if I remember right? That was chemistry and physics, biology, chemistry, physics. Now, angular momentum is basically just saying, oh, is that right? Oh. I'm not pretending it's a course I understood well, but I mean, it was neat stuff. And as I've gotten older and it kind of, you know, got away from the idea of having to memorize it for the exam, angular momentum is how fast something's spinning. So if I was talking about the angular momentum of Mercury, Venus, you know, Earth and all that, we talk about how fast we're going around the sun, right? So I was looking up and reading about electrons in this electron cloud. Now we're looking at electrons here as little green dots, aren't we? And they are little things, particles. I don't think it's little green dots, but they're little particles. But what the definition of an electron cloud, like the one on the right, was saying that electrons have no angular momentum. In other words, they're not spinning around the nucleus, they're all around the nucleus, all at the same time, while they are also these little dots. and again, that's all that quantum stuff. And you think, how much is this? Does you want me to know? None. We're talking about the bonding part. But I do think that's really kind of interesting to think about. Even if you're like me, just go, woo. Okay, I got it a little bit. All right. But regardless of what you think of electrons and how you think of them, either way is fine because it's the truth. What they do is they attempt to bond with other atoms because overall they're increasing stability. And so this is where I kind of always go back and say, you know, biological things with their homeostasis, man, it's all about stability. Even in physics, right? A boulder rolls downhill because of gravity, because gravity says that the overall system is more stable with the boulder downhill. Laws of thermodynamics. So if you hadn't had physics, you know, whatever, but it makes intuitive sense, right? So that's why we have to keep ourselves in homeostasis. That's why we have to metabolize. Well, atoms, now they're not alive, of course, but they also do things in order to increase system stability. So if someone says, Well, why does hydrogen and hydrogen come together? Where overall it actually makes the system more stable. Now, if you're thinking, wait a minute, if I split that, I release a lot of energy. That's true too. It's that Einstein of E equals mc squared thing. That's that weird thing about that simple formula. You go, what's so, excuse me. What's so interesting about that? Well, because it says that energy and mass are related, so things can switch back and forth between being a particle and being like that cloud that you see in the picture, which could be the energy of that particle. Anyway, so overall, what we're doing in bonding, though, is talking about increasing system stability. So in this particular case, it's a numbers game. What you're trying to do, an atom is trying to do, is fill its outer shell. We talked about that in lab. So hydrogen has one electron, because it's got one orbital. And an orbital, regardless of where it is, or what kind it is, or what weird shape it is, amongst the atoms that we're talking about, because I can't remember my chemistry, but anyway, they only hold 2 electrons. They only hold 2 electrons, right? And the first shell, that picture there, that circle around the hydrogen, we've only got that first shell, which has 1 orbital, right? So it's looking for another electron. It's looking for that because that's going to increase stability. Why? Because that's going to fill its valence shell. And that's the word we used for it. So hydrogen, each of those atoms have 1 valence electron in their valence shells. They bond together. They share those electrons too. They share them. What I mean by that is the electrons are going to spend half of their time hanging around over here, and overall half of their time hanging. Electrons like to hang out in pairs. That's what I'm saying, half the time, but not always in pairs. All right, it's that weird thing again. But nonetheless, those electrons are going to be shared equally, and I want you to really kind of notice I'm focusing on the word shared. Right, it's going to become important. Down below, it shows you that you can share more than 1 electron. You could share, for example, in the case of oxygen, who's actually looking for 2 more electrons. Oxygen's got the atomic number of 8. So it's got 2 in the first shell, right? That's how we figured that out. We did it in lab, 6 in the outer, so it's looking for 2 more. It can share 2 pairs, and then nitrogen can share 3. So those are called, in order, obviously, single, double, and triple bonds. The little symbol is important that you understand, because that symbol, that is significant. That tells us what type of bond. That says those 2 hydrogen atoms are held together by a single bond, and that's what makes H2. And that single bond, 1 bond, is a pair of electrons. Remember, electrons hang out in pairs. So don't get hung up on questions like, for example, with oxygen. How many bonds do you see in oxygen? It's a double bond, so you see 2. But how many electrons are being shared, right? Bonds are electrons that are shared in pairs. So it's obviously 4 electrons. Any questions on that? Which bond do you think, by the way, just kind of intuitively, which bond do you think is the strongest bond? Which bond has the most attractive feature between the nuclei? This is what I love about sometimes with biology level chemistry. It's just sometimes it's just intuitive. You just think about it. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Think about it, right? If you were hanging off a cliff, Ryan, and I had a hold you by 1 hand, would that be better or worse than if I had a hold of you by 2 hands? Or would that be better or worse than 2 hands and somehow our legs are tied together? Right? Which bond? Or you could think about it in drops of glue, right? Because that's what those electrons are doing. When you make a covalent bond, see up above the definition, you're sharing that pair of electrons. You're sharing a pair. So those electrons will hang out in a pair. So each time you have a bond, it's another pair of electrons, and that's what's sticking those things together, if you will. I don't want to use the word stick, just bond. Stick is better used for another type of bond, so I don't want you to confuse that. All right, so let's continue on with this for a second, looking at some other things that have covalent bonds. Hydrogen, I showed you. Oxygen, I showed you. Look at water. Water's got a covalent bond, notice. Again, water's missing a couple of electrons, so it could share 2 pairs with another oxygen, right? But there's nothing saying that it can't share a pair with 2 hydrogens, and thank goodness it does, because it makes water. I used to always ask my dad as a kid, what's water? He'd say, 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. I go, okay. He said it was always funny to him that I never bothered to ask what those were. I guess I was like, all right, I got you. It's like flour and sugar. Oh, okay. Guess I just go to the store and buy some hydrogen. All right, so you got a covalent bond there. Methane. You know, one of the largest producers of methane in the world. Where is one of the largest producers of methane? You know what methane is, right? It might be some on Saturn. Cows. Herbivores, by virtue of what they do, graze, they are very flatulent, and so they produce a lot of flatulence. But we have so many cows on Earth that actually the flatulent gas, methane, is one of the contributors to the global warming thing, to that blanketing effect that carbon dioxide is doing, and some other gases. Methane is another one, right? So it's just mind-boggling to me to go, we have that many cows on Earth? Holy cow, literally. And then I was hearing the other day that cows aren't even the number one meat on Earth. It's consumed. It's goat. I was like, wow, I did not know that. I guess goats aren't flatulent. Termites also do that. Termites, I believe they belch methane, if I remember right. Maybe not. Anyway, cool stuff, methane. But anyway, covalent bonds, right? They're sharing their electrons, sharing electrons. Now, let me ask you kind of a philosophical or an out of science kind of question. Sharing, the word sharing. By definition, when you share something, do you have to share whatever you're sharing equally? 50-50. Can sharing be unequal, or must sharing always? No, of course not, right? You can share. You know, if you were the older brother, right, in a relationship with, say, a younger brother, younger sister, and your mom stopped at a store because y'all were fighting in the back seat, and for some reason, whatever, she wasn't thinking and only bought one bag of chips. If you have brothers or sisters, and I've had two children, I know that's cardinal sin, man. Don't buy one bag of chips for two of them. You might be in a situation where you have to share. So if you're the older brother, you're not going to share equally, right? You're going to give your younger brother or sister a chip, and you might eat a handful, and then he gets a chip. That's sharing, of course, but it's not equal sharing. So by definition, right, sharing doesn't have to be equal. So we've been talking about sharing electrons. So if you look at this picture, you might think, well, they must be all shared equally, but they're not. In the hydrogen, they are. The oxygen, they are. And the methane, they are. But in the water, specifically the water, and again, this is we're going to actually talk about water today, man. Water, for all of its big deal, it's clear, liquid, has some incredible properties. It just, man, blows biologists away. But the thing with water, you see that big red one there? That's an oxygen atom. And we say that oxygen has an affinity. Let me type that in. Oops. Here we go. A likeness. It has an attraction because of its nuclear structure, because of the way its nucleus is made. And I'm going to stop there because when you go into chemistry and physics and they talk about more specifics of that. But the point is I'm trying to make is the electrons that are being shared, oxygen's the big brother. Those electrons are not being shared equally, right? So oxygen, I always say, is a pig for electrons. It's why oxygen, that's why the process of oxidation we talk about sometimes in context is, like you say, wow, the roof of your truck is really oxidized, or the trunk or the car or the rubber tires. What the heck was wrong with me? They've oxidized, and of course that means it's looking bad, right? When the paint on your car begins to oxidize, it's decomposing, and that's why if you don't take care of it, especially, it has that gray, nasty. It's not shiny anymore. It's been oxidized because the doggone atmosphere around it is 20% oxygen, and oxygen loves to take electrons off of things. And even though they're only electrons and they're really small, and maybe they're not, well, they're both anyway. Even though they're whatever, seemingly insignificant, when you take an electron off of something, you do as if you were taking a brick out of a building. You're tearing it apart. Okay, so oxidation is destruction. It's destruction. Now, the weird thing about it in chapter, I don't remember, respiration, we're going to talk about how oxygen is necessary. Now, you know that, obviously, you're breathing, right? But the weird thing about oxygen, I always tell my students, is it's almost like planned obsolescence. Every breath, oh, it's like a Sting song. Every breath you take, every time you inhale oxygen, you're actually speeding up that oxidation process. You need oxygen, yes, but the oxygen is also oxidizing your body. It's tearing things down, destruction, very slowly, right? That's why this thing now about antioxidants, pomegranate, blueberries, and then green tea. The idea is to remember, if you're thinking oxidation is a lot in common with entropy, you're exactly right. That's what's going on. Things are being torn apart. But what these antioxidants purported to do is they mitigate. Remember the word mitigate, slow down entropy. That's the whole idea about how to doing the antioxidants. But all right. So what goes on in an oxygen molecule? So now you got to make sure you keep that in your head really clearly. And I'm not saying this jokingly. I used to confuse them a lot. Atom, molecule. Anyway. So what goes on in a water molecule is because of the way the atoms are bonded, because of the way the electrons are being shared, that's the bond, and because they're being shared unequally, there is a net, that's what those blue arrows are trying to show you, there's a net negative charge up near the oxygen end of the molecule and a net positive charge at either end where the hydrogens are. Don't worry about the little squiggly thing, gamma or some Greek thing that means something, I don't know, something in chemistry. But let's talk about the negative and the positive. How does that happen? All right. Oxygen has the atomic number 8. Okay. So let's not worry about the electrons in the first shell, because all of this bonding that occurred, like we saw in the pictures, is going to occur with that valence shell. Remember, what bonding is trying to do is bonding is trying to fill that outer shell to increase stability. So if the inner shell is full, and then, okay, that's fine. You go to the next shell. It's always that valence shell that you're thinking about. So that means that oxygen has 6 electrons in its valence shell. We've already gone through this. Hydrogen has 1. And so what that means, though, when you overall do the count, oxygen always has 8 protons. Remember, an element always has the same number of protons. If you change the number of protons, you change the number. If you wonder why the screen lightens and darkens, I use one of my other monitors kind of make the light not so awful in the camera. You always have 8 protons if you're oxygen. Now, if you're just typical run-of-the-mill out-of-the-box oxygen, you also have 8 electrons. Everything's balanced, 8 positives, 8 minuses. Now, however, if let's say, and I'm going to make these numbers up, but you get the idea. Let's say that the electrons that are being shared, the one from each hydrogen, they spend 80% of their time over near this end. In other words, near the oxygen nucleus, and 10% of the time split among the other two. Really just basic kind of stuff, right? These numbers aren't right. But so what I'm saying is, yes, those electrons are zipping around, but 80% of the time they're all kind of gathered over in this end of the molecule, and the other 10% of the time they're down there. Now, so that means 80% of the time you've got 8 protons from oxygen trying to balance not 8, but 9 or even 10 electrons, right, which are negative. So that means the overall net, that's what we're talking about. Not all the time, but if you stood there and you could measure it and say, you'd say positive, it's positive right now, now it's negative, 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 positive, negative. It would, overall, you count those up, and in my numbers, and they're not right, but 80% of the time, most of the time, that's where the electrons would be, down by the oxygen. So overall, the entire molecule takes on charges, right? It takes on a positive and a negative end, like a magnet, right? The magnets have positive and negative ends, don't they? And what happens in a magnet when you put the positive end of one end close to the negative end of another? They sure do. Buddy mine had one of these earth magnets, those really super duper magnet kind of thing, and he was showing me putting them together, and he got his finger in there, just the tip of, or kind of the little tip of the tissue. It looked a nasty blood bruise, and I'm like, wow, God, that's incredible. Which is stronger, magnetism or gravity? It's like, I haven't had physics. Just think about it. Which is stronger? You say gravity stronger than magnetism? So if my buddy and his earth magnets, they were two little discs, maybe the size of a quarter that he put together. So he's holding them up, and he's got one disc in his hand, and the other disc is below it, and he's holding on to it, and then they're sticking together. Does gravity unattract the magnets, or do the magnets stay together? So which one's stronger? Right? Isn't that cool? You kind of go, I never thought about that, but that's right. And every day, nobody would pick up those magnets. Hold on, let me open my door. Nobody would pick up those magnets and expect really weak magnet, right? But not those earth kind of magnets that'll pinch your finger off. So isn't that neat when you think about that? Magnetism is stronger than gravity. Otherwise, the magnets have come apart. Maybe you'll be on Jeopardy someday, and I'll ask that question, right? That's what I always tell my students. Never know, you could get rich from information that you learned in biology. I'm going to skip this line and remove it. I looked at it again the other day and went, no, it didn't exactly show what I wanted to show. So I'm going to start moving on to the second type of bond that I want to discuss, but I want to make sure we overlap what we've just learned about water into the next type of bond, because water is one of the principal players in this next type of bond, right? So we understand what we've made here is we've made a molecule, not an atom, because be careful, later on we're going to talk about atoms when they get charged, and they're going to stick together for pretty much the same reason, like that magnets do. But I don't want you to confuse that. This is a charged molecule. This actually has a special name. It's not just a covalent bond, but because you get this positive and negative effect here, it's called a polar covalent bond. When you share electrons unequally, you get a polar covalent bond, right? You get a bond that results in a polar molecule. And if you're thinking, okay, how about them other ones? What were they in terms of polar? Well, they were nonpolar. Hydrogen shared electrons equally, so it didn't make poles. So it was a nonpolar covalent bond. Oxygen, nonpolar covalent bond. Methane, nonpolar covalent bond. Water, polar covalent bond. Makes sense, right? I mean, if you're sharing the electron equally, 50% of the time they're going to be positive. It's all going to add. It's like flipping a coin 100 times. You should get 50-50 on all that. So now I want to do a little equate, because later on we're going to come back to this concept, but I want to kind of lay the framework here. When something is polar, I'm trying to type this in. When something is polar, we also say that polar things are hydrophilic. How about hydrophilic? What's hydrophilic mean? Sometimes with these words, we can kind of break down the roots. Was I telling you guys that the other day? I used to try to remember telling my students. Hydro is water, right? Yeah. What's philic? Philic, think of Philadelphia. What we learned in school, Philadelphia was the city of brotherly love, right? Right? Or if you're a bibliophile or anything like that. So hydrophilic means water loving. What? Water can't love each other. What we mean is things that are polar, things that are hydrophilic will dissolve in water. Okay, they'll dissolve in water. Like the best example I like to use is vinegar. Vinegar is an acid, very weak acid. It's called acetic acid. But take clear vinegar, and I say clear because I know there's all the other kinds, apple cider and stuff, and put clear vinegar into a glass of water. Shake it up. Set it aside. Do they separate? Do you see layers after a while, after the water settles down? Okay. I guess I could say run in the kitchen and grab some, but I tell you what, let's do it the opposite way. What if I took water and put salad oil or salad dressing and shook it up and let it sit? What would happen then? Eventually, yeah. The oil, right? The oil in the salad dressing would float to the top, and the water would be on the bottom. Now, those things didn't mix. That's why you shake it up, right? You got to mix it. And the reason why those things don't mix, and I'm going to give you the other word, is because the oil is something that is not polar. The oil is nonpolar, which can also be called hydrophobic. Not water loving, right? Water afraid. In other words, it doesn't like to be around water. Now, I know they're atoms, but when you put the water and the oil together, that's why they separate. The oil molecules stay amongst other oil or hydrophobic molecules. The water molecules, they stay amongst other hydrophilic. In chemistry, or maybe it was chemistry, there's this thing we always say, like dissolves like. Well, what that means is hydrophilic things will dissolve other hydrophilic things. Hydrophobic things will dissolve other hydrophobic things, but they don't dissolve each other. So back to my question about the vinegar. If you're going to make a guess, I shake up the glass of water and clear vinegar. I shake it up, and I come back in an hour, and I notice it looks just like it's either a glass of water or it's a glass of vinegar. I can't tell which. So then this means that the vinegar, the acetic acid, or acids in general, must be what kind of substance? Hydrophilic or hydrophobic? Did they like the water, or did they, stay away water? Like my son when he was younger with a bath. There you go. Right? So oils, waxes, fats, all those things that you know instinctually, that's not going to dissolve in water. Those kinds of things are all hydrophobic, and they would have covalent bonds, right, that are nonpolar, right? They would share those electrons equally, like hydrogen, oxygen, that kind of stuff. Whereas things that had polar covalent bonds who share their electrons unequally, well, they're going to be more hydrophilic. And the reason why they're hydrophilic goes back to the old structure of the water molecule. The reason why substances are hydrophilic is because their molecules, their molecules are charged. They're like little floating magnets. Again, remember, molecule, not atom. So if I put a bunch of little floating charged thingamabobs in a glass, right on the left-hand side, 1, 2, 3, 5 water molecules, guess what happens, right? They stick to one another. They stick. Just like a magnet sticks to each other. The picture's a little bit small, but if you look, there's that squiggly gamma thing, a positive side of one water molecule where the hydrogens are, that's being attracted by a little dot, dot, dot to the negative side of another one. Now that dot, dot, dot is just as significant as that line that you put between the two hydrogens. That meant a covalent bond, right? The dot, dot, dot means a hydrogen bond. Now look at the definition. What is a hydrogen bond? It's not a bond between atoms. Okay? You need to write that in your notes, that's fine, but because it is a bond between molecules. But it is not a bond between all molecules. It's only molecules that have sticky parts to them. It's only molecules that engage in these unequal sharing of electrons. This is what we call a hydrogen bond. So many times students will get hung up on that idea that it always has to involve hydrogen. It doesn't always involve hydrogen, but hydrogen kind of like the word Jello, right? And you think, where the heck is he going? Gelatin dessert. There's lots of companies that make gelatin dessert. Jello, Knox, Publix makes a brand. But if you're going to ask for that dessert, you might say, "Oh, mother, give me some gelatin dessert." No, you probably say, "Can I have some Jello, please?" Excuse me. But Jello's a name brand. So, so the molecules, all right, that we are talking about that are oxidizing, these oxygen molecules that make these polar covalently bonds, they don't always have to involve hydrogen. They just involve something that causes the electrons to be unequally shared. So, but hydrogen is the big principal one that does it. So that's why they call it hydrogen bonds. So like whereas Jello is used for gelatin dessert, even though it may not be the manufacturer, hydrogen bonds may not involve hydrogen. What they involve is polar covalently bonded molecules. I'm sorry, I went around my elbow to get to my thumb on that, but I was trying to emphasize to make sure that when you see the word hydrogen bond, don't automatically assume there's hydrogen going to be involved. It's many times hydrogen because hydrogen sticks to oxygen to make water, and we know oxygen loves electrons, but over on the right, the blue little atom, that's nitrogen. So that's not water, that's ammonia. Nitrogen's kind of like oxygen. It's a pig for electrons too, so it's sharing 3 pairs of electrons with those 3 hydrogens, right? But it's not sharing them equally. You can see it. Didn't really show up right there. There's the negative side, right? And look at a little dotted line. So that's between a hydrogen and the nitrogen of another one. It's how your body uses water to break down food. Like an organic molecule is a lump of food, right? And somewhere on that organic molecule, there's going to be oxygen because organic molecules are full of that thing. And somewhere on there's going to be a hydrogen because organic molecules are full of that stuff. It's the definition. Things that are organic molecules have both carbon, hydrogen, have lots of oxygen many times. So you're going to get your water molecule on the right that goes in and starts tearing that molecule apart. You're thinking, isn't that bad? No, because one thing I didn't tell you about tearing that molecule apart, right? Tearing it off, like removing it, destructing it, oxidizing it, is that also releases energy. But we'll get to that later on. Okay, so understand a chemical, a hydrogen bond. A hydrogen bond occurs between molecules that it's almost like you got to put the 2 concepts together. They're polar covalently bonded atoms that result in molecules that have poles. And I'm sorry, I kind of really twisty-turny on the jello, but I was trying to explain to you this whole idea of what we mean by using the word oxidation or what we mean by using the word hydrogen bond. Maybe that, if that is confusing, maybe I'll kind of help you or get over that confusion when I talk about the next type of bond. So let's see, we got covalent, and we got several types of single, double, triple, polar, nonpolar. We got the hydrogen bond we just went through. Now, 2 atoms that come together could take care of their equilibrium problems, that is, have full outer shells, full valence shells, not if they just shared electrons, but if they could somehow get an electron somewhere. So let's look at chlorine. There's chlorine. Chlorine has atomic number 17. Again, I don't care if you memorize atomic numbers. I happen to have said this a million times, so of course I know it. So if we look at the where the electrons are, there's 2 in the first, 8 in the next, so 17, 8, that's 10, 7 in the outer. So chlorine is missing 1 electron from its valence shell. So chlorine is not as stable as it could be. Now, don't think, chlorine gas is not good stuff, but when I'm talking about stability, I'm not talking about explosion, although that has to do with that. But this is down here at the atomic level, right? So chlorine needs an electron to be, I like to tell students, a happy atom. Atoms can't be happy, but electrons are funny things. There isn't a floating pool of electrons, like a go fish pool of electrons for atoms to draw from. Oh, chlorine says there's an electron. I'll just take that one. Everything's hunky-dory. In other words, every electron out there is spoken for. Every electron out there has an atom it's associated with. So you can't just pick up rogue electrons, go down to the electron store and buy yourself one. You got to do a little finagling, got a little business deal. So, for example, chlorine gets into this deal, this electron business deal, where sodium, totally the opposite, right? Totally opposite of chlorine. It's got the atomic number 11. Okay. See where your connection says your connection's good, but all right, I got you. So sodium's got the opposite. It needs 7 electrons. Now, you could say sodium needs 7 electrons, but you could also say it's got 1 too many. Like it shows in the picture, if sodium could get rid of that red electron up there at the top, that shell, that yellow circle would disappear. And what stability says is you only have to have a full outer shell. You don't have to fill until they're full. You could subtract from ones that are partially full and get the same result. And that's what happens, right? So they get together. Hey, sodium, you got an extra? I need an extra. Bam, look at that. That's perfect. Give me your extra electron. All right, so that transfer of electrons is important there, but that's only half the story. I'm talking about a bond here. When you transfer electrons, you cause these atoms to take on a charge, right? Sodium has the atomic number 11, as I told you, right? Find a place to write. 11 protons. Of course, it had 11 electrons to start with, but now it's lost an electron. It only has 10 now. 10 negative things. So not worrying about the quantity, 1, 2, 3, or 4, is that a positive or a negative? If you got 11 positives and 10 negatives, are you going to be a positive end of the, I always tell my students, positive end of the number line or the negative end of the number line? There you go. So that means that sodium becomes positively charged. Now, for completely the other reason, if chlorine accepted an extra electron, it's now going to have 18 electrons. Can't switch the protons because then you're going to change the element. So the electrons are moving around. So guess what? Chlorine has a negative charge. And once again, just like with hydrogen bonds, what do negative and positive things do to each other? So that's what I meant a second ago when I said the transfer electron is only half the story. You got to transfer the electron to produce these charged atoms, which, by the way, yeah, that's what charged atoms are called. That's what an ion is. That's what an ionic bond is. An ionic bond is a magnetism kind of thing between a positively charged atom, in this case it's sodium, and then chlorine. Just like with, that's why I say be careful, don't confuse this with a hydrogen bond. The one we just talked about before was still the positive and negative and all that sticking together, but it was between molecules, right? Sodium and chlorine are both atoms. They're not molecules. Make sense? Now, an overall strength of bond, right, the 3 bonds we've gone through so far, covalent bonds are the strongest, and of those we went through the exercise, it's going to be the triple bonds that are the strongest of the strong. These guys fit somewhere in between, depending on what's stuck together. The hydrogen bond that I went through, really important, extremely important for life on Earth. Suffice to say that without water sticking together the way I described to you, life wouldn't exist on Earth today at all, especially the way we know it. It's an interesting story we'll get to in just a moment. But those bonds are really weak. Hydrogen bonds are really weak. If you think, demonstration, take a glass of water and or out of a pitcher, pour a pitcher of water, then you stop, you break a hydrogen bond. That last water molecule in the pitcher, that last water molecule in the glass. You don't have to go, rip them apart, right? Just simply pick the glass up. You don't even feel the fact you're breaking the bond. But really important. Doesn't mean that weak bonds aren't important. So that's an important thing to remember. Now, a little bit of terminology here so that when we move on, I can use these words, the proper words, and you all know what I'm talking about. When something becomes positively charged, we call it a cation. And then opposite, when it's negatively charged, it's called an anion. So ionic bonds occur between a cation, a charged atom, and an anion. All right, now I'm going to add to that, okay? There's another term that we use for this, and this is a term that's important because we're going to talk a lot more about this when we get into respiration and photosynthesis. It's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to go through it, and if you get stuck on anything, make sure you let me know, right? When something loses an electron, we say it has been oxidized. So sodium, in this case, got oxidized. Now, right there's a bit, or a chance for confusion. It's kind of like the hydrogen bond, or the hydrogen word of the hydrogen bond. When we're talking about oxidize, oxygen is a great oxidizer, don't get me wrong. Oxygen loves to strip electrons off of things, right? That's what's happening to the paint on your car and all that sort of stuff. But that process of losing electrons, since oxygen is one of the best known oxidizers out there, we've done the Jello thing again. We've named the process of losing electrons by one of the best things that strips or causes you to lose electrons. Oxidation, all right? Or oxidized. So sodium, when it lost an electron, it lost it to chlorine, I know, and there's no oxygen on this page at all, but that's the same thing that oxygen does. So we call it oxidation. So sodium has been oxidized, right? Make sense? So if I use the word oxidation, and you may or may not see oxygen involved. Now the other side of that term, and again, another source of maybe confusion, when an atom like chlorine accepts an electron, we say it's been reduced. Now, I don't know about you. When I first did chemistry, I'm like, are you kidding? Why would you this word is totally opposite of what I think, because nothing's been reduced. It's been added an electron, right? So what's the reduction part? Well, think of the charge again. We went from 17 protons in chlorine and 17 electrons over on the left to 17 protons and 18 electrons. So in terms of the number line, did we go to the add side, or the reduce side? See, what we're talking about here is the fact that you were reduced in charge. You went from neutral to negative. Does that make sense? Hope so, because I tell you, early on, man, I was like, wow, I get those things all met. I kept looking for oxygen when things were oxidized. Okay. Does oxidation make sense and not reduction, or both of them don't make sense? Both of them don't make sense. Really good English, Steve. Okay, good deal. All right, so what we're talking about in reduction is, don't think about it as being reduced in size or being reduced in number of electrons. Think about it what an electron is. It's a negative thing, right? So when you take a negative thing in, you become more negative. So chlorine accepted that negative electron, and now if you do the math, think on the right-hand side, chlorine has got 17 protons. I can write this without making it just a mess. And if you count the electrons, 2, 6, 8, 10, wait, 2 in the first shell, 8 in the next, 10, 8 in the outer shell. So now you got 18 electrons, and 17 positives and 18 negatives puts you in the negative side. So you've reduced in charge. I know, it's like, ugh, right? Any help on that? Help? Sometimes it really is a matter of just kind of continue listening to me say it, and then it kind of sticks in. So let me try. Yeah, okay. Let me try this. Maybe this helps. All right. When something is oxidized, something has to be reduced. All right. Now back to English. When something loses an electron, something has to gain it. There is no loose pile of electrons for chlorine to draw from, and there is no way for sodium to get rid of that electron. It has to give it to another atom. You can't just say, be off with you, electron. Go and be a rogue, lone wolf electron. No, can't do that. Can't do that. The laws of chemistry say, no. If you have an extra electron, you got to find somebody who will take it. And if you need an extra electron, you got to find somebody who will give you one. So you always got to do reduction, or let's start with the other word, oxidation. You always have to have oxidation with reduction. You can never have one alone. You got to have them the same. By definition, if something loses an electron, something else, an atom has to gain it. All right, so in chemistry class sometimes, and I'll use these words, you'll see the word, there you go, redox. You'll say the chemistry teachers will talk about, this is a redox reaction. A redox reaction is a combination of the words reduction. What do you call it? A combination. Whatever. When you put words together, a reduction and oxidation, right? To remind you, they call them redox reactions. To remind you, cannot have one without the other. If something loses an electron, a negative thing, and becomes more positively charged, in other words, it got the process was oxidation, so sodium got oxidized, then that electron had to go somewhere, right? Something had to accept it and went to chlorine, and in this case, that made it more negatively charged, and when you become more negatively charged, we say you got reduced in charge, not in quantity of things. That help, or you're just like, get away? Good. If not, if as soon as class is over, you're like, oh my gosh, just shoot me an email, right? Or talk to me in class. We can go over it again. I will attempt to, I not attempt, but I will bring up the term again and again. And kind of, this is the last bond I want to talk about, but I got to talk about about this. I just have to, because it's not a very well-known chemical bond, and it's not one for a long time. It's not one that we thought any living thing ever used. Now, all of us living things use covalent, ionic, and hydrogen bonds to do living stuff, right? But these named after somebody. That's why, if you're wondering what the heck is a van der Waals, that's the dude who described or discovered these, if you want to say that. You ever notice a gecko? We have a species of gecko here in Florida. Unfortunately, it's not a native. It's a Mediterranean native. But anyway, you notice that geckos are really good at walking up vertical, very slick surfaces. I mean, I've seen some videos on YouTube where maybe not completely vertical, but doggone it, they can go up glass that's a lot more vertical than you and I could go. So, and glass is not very sticky, right? So you think, how the heck do they do that? And they're really good climbers. So anyway, biologists got interested, and they began to look at the toe pads of a gecko. If you ever look at, next time you see one of them little geckos, they have them around the biology building. They move different than a lizard. They're really squiggly movers, right? So if you see something light colored on the floor, usually early in the morning, I usually kind of shoo them outside. Check out the toes. They have pads around the toes. So what they did is they took see them up above. They took those and they used an electron microscope. Oh man, if you ever get a chance to be around one of those, they're cool. I did just a little 1 day's worth at the University of Georgia med school up there one time when I was doing work up there. Oh gosh, it was incredible, right? Anyway, so what they did is they took the toe pads of these geckos and they took an electron microscope, and that picture down below that looks like bristles on a toothbrush, right? Doesn't it look like bristles on a toothbrush? So they're like little bristly. Yeah, all those toe pads, all four of them, of course, are just covered in these little bristly-like things. And gosh, I don't know how many, but let's just say a bazillion. It's not even a word, right? All right, so you got a bazillion of these little bristle tips touching the surface of the glass, all right, touching the surface of the glass. Now, those bristle tips have molecules, and they have atoms, right? Just like everything. Everything's got atoms and molecules. So at the end of each one of those bazillion bristle tips, there's maybe another bazillion molecules made up of another bazillion atoms, right? You get where I'm going with this? Numbers, lots and lots. So at the tip of each of those bristles, there is just a boatload. Got to be bigger enough. Shipload, just a bunch and atoms. I mean, you could look it up online, the data if you like, but I'm telling you, there's a whole bunch of atoms there. Okay, that's the biology. I always love to talk about form and function. We're gonna do a little form. So we got a form there. We got something that can crawl up really slick surfaces, and when we look at it with an electron microscope, we notice that on those pads of these little really, really small, because you got to use an electron microscope, bristly like things, and bunches of those, right? They're all in little ridges. If you used a hand lens, you'd see little ridges. That's where they all are. And there's just a boatload of these with a bunch of atoms, right? Does that make sense, Ryan? But I'm kind of, the point I'm getting with the numbers there, because I'm going to show you the bond now, and we're going to make the, so cool. So what is a van der Waals force? All right, look at the picture I have of the atoms. Atoms have protons and electrons, yes. And many times those are all very nicely distributed evenly. Right? Don't confuse this necessarily with polar and nonpolar. Let's just talk about and looking at an atom. So we got the protons and the electrons, and they're zipping around, and usually they're spread in such a way so that the electrons are kind of evenly spread around. Now, is this all the time? No, right? This is like the water thing again. Not all the time, but, oh gosh, 99.9% of the time, if you were to look at I don't know, you have to look the number up. If you were to look at an atom, it would be a nice, even kind of electron cloud between those two atoms. But every once in a while, really, really rare, you have these forces, but you couldn't use them like the gecko does. So don't try to climb up a almost vertical wall of glass without something, unless you got really big fingerprints. Anyway, every once in a while, atoms, especially if they're really close, like let's say the atom of the end of one of those bristles, so we'll say this is the gecko,
gets 5 nanometers really close. Really close. Nanometers is way over on the metric scale. This is the mirror. But every once in a while, very rarely, I don't know, 1 in a bazillion, right? Okay? If those molecules are close enough, every once in a while, the arrangement of the electrons, because they're zipping around randomly, 99.9% of the time they're even, but every once in a while they're all on one side. They're all on one side. So on the glass, they might all be on the right-hand side of the atom, and on the mirror, they're on the right-hand side of the atom. That means the right-hand cloud of the atom on the left, because remember those electrons, they're not little, those little minus signs, right, is going to be closer to the positive things, the particles in the nucleus of the other atom. And just like in hydrogen bonds, although they're not hydrogen bonds, I repeat, not hydrogen bonds, like hydrogen bonds, you get that very weak, and in this case, gone in a microsecond. These electrons are zipping around so fast that that bond you see in the bottom lasts, oh gosh, I don't know, hardly any time at all. Look, how does the gecko use that to climb up the glass wall then? Numbers. Remember back to the bristles? There's a bazillion of them, and then on the end of them, there's a bazillion atoms, and if you got a bazillion times a bazillion, and or a bazillion molecules, I said, then a bazillion atoms. So bazillion times a bazillion times a bazillion is a good, it's a big, almost like infinity, right? Almost like infinity. So this gecko has almost infinite atoms that are touching up on these glass molecules. And the glass has got infinite atoms, and they're all doing their 50% of the time. But every once in a while, a few of them, you could do that. That'd be a great physics project. How many of these little bristles, how many atoms actually have to stick together to allow the gecko to climb up the glass? In other words, to not defy, but to allow the mass of the gecko to not cause it to slide down the glass. That'd be cool. This is a van der Waals force, right? I just got to talk about it because I just think this is so neat. Again, a weak, asymmetrical, right? It's the asymmetry of where the electrons are in the 2 atoms below. Again, we used to, for many years, I didn't discuss these in class because we figured it was just something that atoms do, and then all of a sudden along comes this idea of the gecko going, holy cow. So maybe he's right about insurance. Where are we? 8:58. Cool. How we doing, Ryan? Isn't that neat? You have any pet reptile critters? I have a guy in my other class that has a boa constrictor. I love snakes and I love reptiles. I just never really saw them as a pet, you know. I just never really saw them as something that crawls up my lap while I'm watching TV or something. But I know some people who do. But a friend of mine in college had a huge boa that lived in our house. She'd bring it to school every once in a while. Do you? Now, okay. Be careful. Those brownish or greenish lizards you see, those aren't geckos. Lots of things can change color among reptiles. These are the ones, and you might have seen them. I'm not saying you did, but like from above, you can see their eyes. They got big bulging eyes, and if you get close enough, they have those pads, and especially if they're against a light background, they'll be almost a very light sand color, but they're not very big. I can't tell through the camera maybe. And when they move, they're really back and forth. Yeah, they might be. Yeah, they came over from the Mediterranean on ornamental plants. Anyway, next time you see one, right, you have a different admiration for it. I watch that stuff on TV and I'm like, you're kidding me. Oh, man, I'd love to go into space. It would be so cool to see the Earth like this, wouldn't it? Just to float around. I wonder, I probably would I get seasick in the Navy, so I'm guessing I'd probably get whatever, space sick or whatever you call it. What I'm trying to show you here, of course, you've heard a million times, if you look at us, we're a big blue marble. It's mostly water, right? It's mostly water. There is some land, thank goodness, but the Earth is 2/3, 3/4 water, depending on if you throw in the lakes and the rivers and all that sort of stuff. So that must mean that water is pretty important, right? And it is. We know that. We know that from us living here. We know that from our hypotheses about astrobiology, right? Our hypotheses that if we were to discover life somewhere on another planet, life like us anyway, we would expect there to be water because it has such an important role on living things. And it all comes down, all comes down to bonds. All comes down to those little weak, very weak hydrogen bonds, right? That are caused by the polar covalent bonds, right? So we're going to talk about some properties of water, some that I know you know, but maybe just never really put to the chemistry. So we're going to talk about properties of water and how these hydrogen bonds fit in. I love talking about this because, hydrogen bonds, they're so slight. Two water molecules can be separated by the breath of a butterfly. Anyway, but without them, we can't have life as we know it. All right, and we know water is important, right? When you're out at practice, you definitely know water is important. If you don't hydrate, you're not going to be able. I was running the other day. It was really hot and sweaty, and I ran by a nursing home, and one of the nurses who was walking through said, as she passed by me, she said, "Stay hydrated." Now I don't know if she was a nurse, but I bet she was. Just knowing her, right? But you know that how important water is, right? And let's look at the chemistry. Let's do that form and function. Let's combine what's going on chemically with what we as living things have used, say, I don't know, to our advantage or to our ability to survive, right? The laws of physics, laws of what water does with the polar covalent bonds and the hydrogen, they were already around when life came on the scene, right? Earth's around 1 billion or so years before life comes on the scene. But let's take a look at them, and we'll start. I'm going to come back to this table. I'm looking at my slides. Yes, I do. I have to come back, so don't worry about taking it all at once. Let's start at the top, the properties of water. There are, 4-ish, 2 of them together considered temperature moderation. We'll get to those in a second. Water sticks together. I've already showed you that why, right? I've already showed you the hydrogen bonds that cause them to stick together. All right. Why is that so important to us? Oh, you know what? You saw sticking together in the lab. Come on, there we go. Over on the right. The graduated cylinder. Remember reading those the other day? How I said you had to read the bottom of the meniscus? And I said it's because water gets kind of like a mini contact lens, right? You see it in a straw, right? If you're having well, not so much plastic. It really works in glass, but you see that thing being pulled up the side, right? That's because of water. Now, in this case, in the graduated cylinder, water is not sticking to water, it's sticking to glass, right? Which is, in its own, pretty doggone good. It's kind of like that Van der Waals thing. I was going to say something, but I wasn't really sure. Adhesion, cohesion between water and... adhesion is 2 things that stick together that are the same. So if water sticks to water or whatever you're talking... If substance A sticks to substance A, it's adhesion. If substance A sticks to substance B, water to glass, cohesion. Adhesion, sticking together of the similar things, is stronger than cohesion, what I'm trying to show you there. But we saw an illustration, right? We saw that pulling up of the water molecules. Now, graduated cylinders aren't alive, but guess what? Something that looks a lot like it are trees. Now, trees don't look like a graduated cylinder, no. But the tubes inside this tree, see the middle picture, 2 types of water conducting cells? If you look at them, we're looking at cross-section wise, we're looking through tubes, right? Those are tubes that go up the tree, out the branches, out the leaves, all the way, because trees need water. Just like you and I, they got to be hydrated, but they also need water for photosynthesis, which we'll talk about later on, right? Well, how does the water defy the force of gravity? It's like I always tell my wife, you don't need to water the leaves of the plants. They like it. I'm like, they do. I said, actually, you promote fungal growth. I said, the water comes up from the roots, right? So the rain comes down, blah, 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 up through the roots. How does water defy the force of gravity like it shows in the blue arrows? It sticks to each other, right? Adhesion, water to water, and it sticks to the sides of those tubes, cohesion. So just like what we call, with the word capillary. Oh, God, I'm really having trouble just when I'm typing. Capillary attraction is what I'm talking about here. Same thing that happens in a straw. Ooh, I bet you are getting lag, because I'm getting lag just typing things out. If this is a problem, remember it is recorded, so you can catch the last, whatever few minutes or 15 minutes we have on recording if it becomes awful. You know what? I'm going to turn my camera off. That might help. Anyway, so same thing works in allowing the water to move up a tree, which is, of course, pretty important for a tree, right? They obviously need to have water. They die. But there are other places that you've seen it. If you've ever done the trick in school, we did it in chemistry. We floated a needle, a sewing needle on a glass of, in a thing of water. You ever done that? You're very difficult. You got to really have a steady hand. I could never do it now, I'm sure. Did you ever do that in school? You do it with a dime as well. Yeah, you can do it with a dime. And what that is taking advantage of is the same thing that the spider in the upper right, and then the down below, we actually call them water striders for the reason that's exactly what they do. They stride on water. But what I want you to notice in all the pictures is the indentation of the water. See? Here it's really obvious, right? Indentation. You notice how the legs are pushing down on the water? So this guy floats, or not floats, he walks on water. He doesn't float. He actually walks on water. So does the water strider, although yeah, you can see him. Right there, right? What this critter is taking advantage of, is the fact the water molecules, let me go back a couple slides to get a visual, are sticking to one another. They're being adhesive. Now, the water strider and the spider, and if you do it really carefully, the dime and the sewing pen, if you just do it right, that's why spiders have an advantage, because lots of legs. You notice the water strider's got really long, thin legs. If they just barely touch on the surface of the water, you won't break those hydrogen bonds. So look at the spider. He's actually like walking across a soft mattress. Right? He's actually just barely stressing, but not breaking those hydrogen bonds. Man, that's neat. Right? So adhesion, a property, cohesion, a property that we see chemically at living things. No, I know a sewing pin's not alive, but you understand what I mean, right? Isn't that cool? Next time you check one of these guys out in water, I don't know if what you like with arachnids or insects. Just see if you get it close up, you can see the indentations. It's incredible. She's like, I'll be done. That's exactly what they're doing. The next thing we're talking was what I was talking to you about, being out in training or in practice. Obviously, temperature moderation. Now, start down below for a second. What I got in red. Why do we need to temperature moderate? To maintain homeostasis, right? Get hot, you sweat. Get cold, you shiver. But we're not talking about getting cold. We're talking about getting hot. So what is it about water that allows us to use it as a way to cool ourselves off, right? So I've combined these two together to call them temperature moderation, high specific heat. They are different things, though. And something called high heat of vaporization, right? What we mean by high specific heat, if you see that, it's the hydrogen bonds that are between the water molecules. They'll absorb a lot of heat, right? And then when they do absorb too much heat, they'll eventually break apart and they'll release some energy. All right, let me show you a visual of this. I'm going to jump ahead a couple slides that you haven't seen yet, but I'm going to make my way back there. Don't worry. Here's what I'm trying to show you. If you could imagine. If you look at this on well, it doesn't do it on the PDFs, but anyway, if you could replace those hydrogen bonds with springs, you might have a good visual representation of what I'm talking about. Imagine those hydrogen bonds that occur are flexible, they're springy. So when you heat up water, right? When you heat up from the sun, the water in your body, the water molecules begin springing. I need my camera. They begin boom, 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 bouncing back and forth. So if it's cold, if it's absolute zero, they don't move at all. But anyway, probably, no, if you're freezing, they don't move, Steve. Dumb thing to say. Anyway, if it's cold, they move a little bit. When it's warm, they move a lot. When it's really warm, they move a lot. Now, what those springiness is doing is it's absorbing the heat. What do I mean by that? It's acting like a radiator. It's acting like the radiator of your car. The radiator of your car puts the liquid through the engine because the liquid absorbs the heat. Right? And then the fluid, coolant goes through the radiator and it's cooled off by the wind blowing through it. Same thing is happening here. So the springiness, now can you overcome the springiness? Yeah, that's when water becomes steam. See, when those springs are broken, then water molecules get further apart and they become less dense. And that's what steam is. Steam is water that's just less dense. Ice is water that's real dense. Liquid water is somewhere between, depending on whether it's cold or not, right? Well, we talked about it in lab the other day. The cold part of the pool is always on the bottom. Colder water, or if you scuba dive, the further down you go, typically the colder it gets, right? So you got these springy things moving back and forth, moving back and forth. And what they're doing in your body is absorbing heat, which is good because heat is not good for your body. You need some, right? You need some. We're warm-blooded critters, and it's really beneficial for us. But you don't want too much. I'm trying to find my slide. Not that it's lagging. But you don't want too much heat, because if you get too much heat, then things start shutting down, right? Heat stroke, heat exhaustion, even death can sometimes happen. So that's what those two kind of mean together. It means that hydrogen bonds can absorb a lot of heat, bounce, and then when they do break, they become steam. They release heat. They release it in the atmosphere. I know you have it practice. You look at a friend of yours or something, and you can see steam coming off his body, right? You can see steam because that's what it's doing. His body's we call it evaporative cooling. Your body does this evaporative cooling. So that's what high heat of vaporization means. It means that you got to break a lot of hydrogen bonds before you make that steam, which means you release a lot of energy. And in the case of sweating, you're doing it off your skin, right? Because you got to stay 98.6. Your core does. You don't want your core to get above that, especially up around your brain. Now, what's cool about this is we can really extend it to big things. We can say that this whole idea that water can absorb heat, come back to that in a second, can help us in the environment. Take a look down there at the Pacific Ocean map that I got. I lived in San Diego, stationed there when I was in the Navy, and the weather is beautiful. It's everything everybody says as far as the weather, but it's really crowded, okay? But notice what happens as you move away from the coast. So what the thing about San Diego, LA, Santa Barbara is the weather's very consistent throughout the year. San Diego can be 70 in the summer, can be 70 in the winter. It rarely gets really, really cold. It rarely gets really, really hot. It's a great place as far as the weather. Kind of the same with LA, except the pollution problem in LA's in a big basin. But as you move away from the ocean, you notice San Bernardino, even though it's 72 in San Diego, just San Bernardino is 2 or 3 hours away, if I remember right. It can be much, much hotter. See, being next to the Pacific Ocean, I can attest to this. The Pacific is 68 degrees a lot of the time of the year. It ain't like here in Florida where you go splashing around the water. You don't spend a lot of time in the Pacific. You just go cool off and come back out because it is cold, right? But because of the temperature of the Pacific Ocean, especially down around San Diego, that moderates the temperature of San Diego. So during the day, instead of San Diego heating up a lot, it does, right? The water heats up more. The Pacific Ocean heats up a lot more, right? So that's kind of like a radiator. And at night, when the sun goes down, that's something that's weird about San Diego. It gets really chilly at night, but it's because there's not a lot of humidity in the air. But that is helped a little bit by the fact that that water that heated up during the day, the Pacific Ocean, begins to release that heat. That's the opposite, because now the air is cooler than the water. We always go from hot to cold, right? If you want to know what it would be like if we didn't have the ocean to do this, we can compare ourselves to Mars. Mars doesn't have water. May have at one time, but it doesn't now. And as Elton John says, it's really not a nice place, because at night, in one day, minus 75 degrees Celsius or minus 103 Fahrenheit, if you're still stuck there. During the day, though, it gets to a nice balmy freezing. Nice balmy freezing. It's a nice balmy freezing day here on Mars. So that ability of water to absorb that heat, right, is very beneficial, not only to obviously to the world, okay, but to humans as well. That's why we evaporatively cool, see? Now, what is heat of vaporization? I give you a little definition there. It's the amount of heat, and you would measure that in joules. Like what? Like JW? No, joules. That's a measurement of heat. So it'd be the amount of heat that 1 gram of water absorbs to be converted into steam, to be converted into gas, okay? So what that is basically saying, that definition there, is the reason why we cool off is because every time a gram of liquid absorbs off the surface of, and a gram of liquid ain't nothing. It takes 28 grams to make an ounce. So it's 1/28 of an ounce, right? Every time a little tiny droplet of liquid comes out, it absorbs a lot of heat as it's converted into gas. So we use it to cool off. I think that's a Thompson's. The Thompson's Gazelle, they use this in a really clever way. If you notice the brain there in the picture, obviously brain is important to keep cool. Among many things, you can heat up certain body organs, but you don't want to heat up the brain because you start messing with the ability to think, right? That's not a good thing to do. So if you look right here, where you got this sort of mesh, what that mesh does is as the warmer blood comes up from this artery right here, the warm blood, that mesh right there interacts with the nose and allows that blood to be cooled off before it goes to the brain. So that mesh is kind of like a roundhouse with a bunch of train tracks, right? So the blood that's coming in from the carotid artery that's warm, maybe a little too warm because it's heating up in the body from the sun, you know, or the thing is running away from something. It doesn't go to the brain first. It goes to the nose where the animal inhales, air moves over the surface. That's why the same way a breeze helps when you're sweating. And it cools off the blood, and then the blood goes to the brain so that the poor critter doesn't, start short-circuiting in the brain department there. Isn't that neat? I love it when they find that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh my goodness, like the gecko. Okay, let me introduce a few terms to you. We're still on moderation of temperature by water. We're still in those second and third properties, if you're wondering. And I've told you the stuff up there. Water can release or absorb a lot of heat. This is due to some definitions. Specific heat, the amount of heat that must be absorbed or lost for 1 gram to change 1 degree Celsius. It's just a standard. It's a standard. It's like the king holding up a rock and saying that's a pound. Us scientists, not me, have said that specific heat is the amount of heat that something, in this case it's water, but it could be anything else, that absorbed or lost, how many joules, if you take 1 gram of that, whatever that is, and change it 1 degree Celsius. Now, water takes 1 calorie. Calorie is another form of energy. We think about it in food, but, right, calories are energy. Aren't calories energy? You don't have enough, you don't have any energy. So in water, 1 calorie per gram per degree Celsius, right? So a calorie is raising the temperature of water 1 gram, 1 degree Celsius. Now, see, the whole thing about water, though, that's about that is it resists changing state. Now, what that means is it doesn't resist mentally, but that means, in other words, water can absorb a lot and a lot and a lot of heat. Here, think about it. Once the water turns to steam, yes, it releases a lot of heat at that time, but now you got less water, right? That's the purpose why you hydrate. You're replacing the water you're losing. Once you've lost that water, even though it turned to steam and released a lot of heat, once you broke those hydrogen bonds, yes, you released a lot of heat, but now that water is no longer in your body to absorb, bounce on these springs before it turns into steam, which is why you got to drink more, right? So water resists, it can absorb a lot of this bouncy before it finally turns to steam and does its final heat thing, but is gone from your body, right? Thank goodness water's that way. They tell us honestly, if you look at the properties of water just kind of on paper, that water on Earth should be a gas. It shouldn't be mostly a liquid, but there's some special properties of water, including this one, that they slightly stick together that allow water to stay a liquid. Right, so that's what I mean about water being really, really cool. Little tiny box. I'm going to just introduce you to the next thing. Let me go back to the slide. I know we're just at the last minute, but let me get you on this because I'll maybe give you something to think about over the weekend. Remember, we don't have class Monday, right? Y'all Monday, Wednesday. The next property I want to talk about, just introduce it to you. I want to show you a picture, and of course, it's called the fact that ice has a lower density. So I'm on the 4th one. So stick with me 1 second. Let me go back to the slide I want, and then I will turn you loose. Water, that's so neat. Come on. All right. This is taking forever. Forget it. The slide I was going to show you, now it does it, next one, is something kind of interesting. Well, at least to me, it's kind of interesting, especially when you stand back and you take a look at it. What you see in the next slide is the fact that on the left-hand side, when we put solid water into liquid water, I know that's iced tea, but it's mostly liquid water, it floats. So a solid floats in a liquid. That seems odd, right? If you threw a rock into a pond, a solid, it wouldn't float. It would sink in the pond. But other substances very similar to water. On the right-hand side is a beaker of liquid and solid benzene. Not water, but benzene. And in this case, it follows what we would expect. A solid piece of benzene is going to sink in a liquid piece of benzene. That's what we would expect. Yet none of you are surprised when ice floats, though, right? So think about that over the weekend. I'll stop right here. I'm sorry, I went a minute over. Think about what we can talk about when we start about why it is that ice floats. What's unique about water, solid water, ice, it allows it to float, okay? All right, let me stop the recording.